Yeah, thank you for a very warm welcome. I've spent the past 2 days, is this picking up? Yeah, good. Going around the state of Maine, visiting some of your research centers, some of your trade organizations and others. And everyone's just been, I've picked up the main phrase. The main phrase is, yeah, we'll figure it out. So I'm going to go back to Scotland, and anytime something's uncertain, or I'm going to go, hey, it's okay, we're going to figure it out. So I figured out that what's really important in Maine is people and people connections. So I want to start by trying to connect with you, because you don't know me. And despite what Sebastian said, you don't really know what I'm like. I've found a little, but I've met some of you already. But let's start with which country between Scotland and Maine has the biggest land area? Hands up if you think it's Maine. Okay, and hands up if you think it's Scotland. Oh, come on, you're Americans. You're meant to do this stuff.
Do it again. Try again.
All right. Which country out of Maine and Scotland, or obviously Scotland's a part of the UK and Maine's a state of the US, but Maine and Scotland, which one has the biggest land area? Maine, hands up.
Maine.
And Scotland? It's Maine. Okay. Which country has the biggest population? Is it Maine or Scotland? Hands up for Maine.
Scotland.
Okay, yeah, so Scotland 5.4 million, Maine 1.4 million. Which of the two places has the longest coastline? This is a real killer question. Because you guys have got the longest coastline pretty much in the US, apart from, I don't know, Alaska or Texas, maybe longer. But is it Maine or is it Scotland? So hands up for Maine. Okay, so we know Maine has 3,500 miles of coastline. Scotland has 6,160 miles of coastline. Little tiny country, lots and lots of islands, and lots of coastline. Nearly done here. You're humoring me, aren't you? Which aquaculture innovation center was founded at the furthest time ago? Was it Maine, M-A-I-C, or was it SAIC?
Maine.
There we go. So Maine, 1988, SAIC, 2014, the same year that you started having one of these conferences.
Which has a bigger budget?
We're getting to that. We're getting to that. But I'm saving my political punches for the end, you know? All right, thank you. So I'm going to show you some slides. I was actually hoping I could have it on a slightly different format, but where are we? There we go. That's what I wanted. Cool. So let's start with what do we mean by innovation? I think it's helpful to define which bit of innovation you're working in, because there's multiple different ways of thinking about innovation. So this is a slide that we have in some of our collateral. It talks about everything from the end of the spectrum where you're coming up with ideas and you're being creative and you're thinking, could we do this thing in a different way, to actually doing some data collection and some analysis of, do we even have a problem? Do we know where the problem is? Do we know how big the problem is? All the way through to, right, let's do some whizzy technology. Let's apply technology from land animal production to fish farming, or from fish farming technology to insect growing or whatever. But actually what you'll see along the right-hand side of here is it's all about teamwork, because you cannot deliver innovation without people communicating and collaborating. And I think that would be a key message that we've learned on our journey. So we've done a little bit of introducing Scotland and Maine. I thought I would just show you some photographs, because a picture tells 1,000 words. So that's a picture that's probably familiar to you guys. That is a mussel farm in Shetland, which is a set of islands off the north coast of Scotland. And that's a picture of some product ready to go to the consumer. One factor in Scottish shellfish that might be of interest to you is that 19 of the biggest mussel and oyster growers came together and formed a processing cooperative. So they have a guaranteed buyer for all of their product. The processing plant processes more or less 100% of the shellfish from Scotland, and they supply every single retailer, every single food service, and every single restaurant in the UK. And that processing plant also imports Maine lobster. So, you know, they do processing for all shellfish. But that's quite an interesting model, because it gives some guarantees to the farmers. We're doing a little bit of seaweed growing, but probably nothing like as much as you are. So I would absolutely love to learn what you're doing in terms of developing markets for seaweed products, both in food and non-food. So this is a picture of a seaweed farmer on the island of Skye off the west coast of Scotland. And yes, I'm afraid it is still an unautomated, manual, heavy-duty, fairly high-risk harvesting process. So are there scopes for innovation in all of that? So already I'm getting bored of listening to myself talk, so I'm going to play you a really short video about aquaculture in Scotland. We have the three: finfish, shellfish, and seaweed. And finfish is far the biggest, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But I think this does a really nice job of taking you on a camera tour around Scotland and to show you some of the bits and pieces of what we do. So here we go. There's a slight delay while it kicks up.
Put simply, aquaculture is farming at sea. Globally, hundreds of species are farmed, but the cool waters of Scotland lend themselves to salmon, trout, oysters, mussels, and seaweed. The most significant of these, at 96% of the total production, is Atlantic salmon, representing the UK's biggest food export. Compared to capture fishery, modern aquaculture is
Is there any way to get the volume bigger? It's higher, as high as it can be here. Okay.
Yeah, we're up as high as we go.
All right, fine.
Okay,
Sorry about that. My glamorous assistant will get his due reward
Put
later
simply,
on.
aquaculture is farming at sea. Globally, hundreds of species are farmed, but the cool waters of Scotland lend themselves to salmon, trout, oysters, mussels, and seaweed. The most significant of these, at 96% of the total production, is Atlantic salmon, representing the UK's biggest food export. Compared to capture fishery, modern aquaculture is a new industry, taking commercial foothold in the 1970s. But already, half of the seafood we eat is farmed rather than wild caught, and this is only expected to grow. Compared to land-based farming, marine fish farming takes up very little space. In Scottish waters, only 0.002% of the surface is occupied by fish farms, against the 73% of Scottish land devoted to agriculture. Finfish and shellfish farming are also very efficient methods of producing healthy protein. Salmon and trout benefit from excellent feed conversion ratios and a low carbon footprint, with emissions in line with those of sheep farming. Seaweed production, where kelp can grow up to 60 times faster than land-based plants, has been lauded as a carbon-negative business opportunity that could help reverse ocean acidification. The aquaculture industry in Scotland operates from a variety of different locations, from on-land hatcheries and tank-based systems to open net pens at sea, following the complex life cycle of the salmon. A relatively small number of producers is served by a supply chain covering equipment and technology, feed manufacture, processing, and distribution. A recent report commissioned by the Scottish Government found that aquaculture contributed around £885 million to the wider Scottish economy and supported 11,700 jobs. Many of these jobs are in remote, rural communities, providing well-paid employment for generations of people. With a rising global need for healthy protein and an increasing emphasis on responsible food production, the Scottish aquaculture sector is in a prime position to grow. This growth will involve innovation in the areas of technology, health and welfare, data and artificial intelligence, and exploring different locations, such as moving further out to sea or to land-based recirculation systems. SAIC's role is to help drive this innovation, to nurture the aquaculture professionals of the future, and to share the knowledge gained through our work. Get in touch to find out how we can help.
Thank you for that. Sorry. My assistant will be back again. So I think you've probably spotted quite a lot of similarities there in terms of the role of MAIC and SAIC. There's a function around convening people and bringing people together, creating knowledge exchange, stimulating collaborative conversations, identifying what your research priorities are. So I picked up this when I checked in, and I've highlighted all the things that we have in common between Maine and Scotland. And almost everything that you see as a priority, we see as a priority too. Sorry, Chris, I think we might be stuck again. Yeah, could you put the slides on presenter mode?
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
I don't know how to do that. Yeah. Presenter, what's this presenter? Is that it?
Yeah, try that one.
Oh. Sorry.
Let's go down one first of all.
Okay.
So here and then try this one. Okay, that's fine. So how important is farm fish in Maine compared to capture fisheries? Everybody's heard of Maine lobster. Wonderful product, high-value species. I had the most amazing Maine scallops for my lunch yesterday, and it was a normal lunch plate. In Scotland, I am obsessive about checking my dietary intake, so I logged 4 before it came. And the plate came, and there were 10 enormous scallops. So, like, damn, it's good to be in Maine. But, but what this slide will show you is that the value of farmed fish, or farm species in the UK, is worth way more than capture fisheries. Salmon on its own, this big pink bar, is worth 1.5 times every species of fish caught by every single fishing boat landed into every single UK port, not every single Scottish port, every single UK port. We're talking Cornwall, we're talking Belfast, we're talking Whitby and Grimsby on the East Coast. So aquaculture, for us as a small country in the UK, is a driver of future economic growth. And the first time I went to Norway and I landed at, I think it was Bergen Airport, and I got off, there was this huge billboard, and it was paid for by Biomar, the feed company. And they had a kind of strapline that said, aquaculture is the sustainable future. And then kind of in brackets, it wasn't on the picture, but it's what people said when I talked to them. The Norwegian government has identified that North Sea oil is going to run out. And they've made millions and billions off North Sea oil. But 10, 15 years ago, the government said the sustainable long-term industry for Norway, post-North Sea oil, is aquaculture. It's salmon. And Norway is the biggest salmon producer in the world for good reason. And they're the biggest initiator of technology because they recycle a lot of that profit into applied R&D. So Scotland wants to be like that. In terms of the balance between shellfish and finfish, little picture here of it's a bit of a mouthful by country's name. It's the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's not England, sorry, folks. England is just this grey bit here. The rest of us have our own separate identities. But more or less a quarter each of Wales, England, Northern Ireland, and Scotland for shellfish. And value, Scotland has a little bit over 1/3. But when it comes to finfish, completely different story. Here we see that Scotland is 97% by volume of finfish landed or grown, produced in the UK, and basically 98% by value. So it's a very important, very significant sector for us. $1.4 billion per year. Where does it happen? This graph, this picture, is showing you green dots for freshwater aquaculture and red dots for seawater aquaculture. Quite a lot of the green dots on land will be for stocking trout fisheries and ponds and kind of recreational fishing. So what you'll see here is that Scotland is a kind of unique test case of a country where 50% of the coastline you're allowed to farm fish in the sea, which is all down the west coast and the islands. 50% of the coastline of that 9,000 miles of coastline, there's no marine fish farming at all. And you might think, why is that? Well, the main reason is that on the west coast, it's more fjordic, it's more bays and inlets, you have a bit of shelter, you have deeper water, so it's better suited to fish farming. But also the other really important answer is that 80% of wild salmon rivers, so our Rocky Mountains are not very big actually, but they come down here, So all the rivers drain this way. So you have really big complex river systems, which are great for wild salmon. So in terms of protecting the interactions between wild salmon and farm salmon, we have all of the noise that you have. We have a lot of the noise that British Columbia has. But we're able to say the decline in wild fish on this side is exactly the same rate as the decline of wild fish on this side. So it can't be aquaculture, because there's no aquaculture on this side. Anyway, sorry, that's a digression, but it's something I'm passionate about, because scientists or NGOs can use little bits of information to really hammer against aquaculture in a way that, to me, is not evidence-based, and it's not fair, and it's not reasonable. And I don't know if that happens here, but that's just my perspective. Right, let's talk a little bit about some of the research that we do. I guess I've been kind of teed up slightly to talk about money, so I'll mention it, hopefully not in a crass way, because that would be crass, wouldn't it? Why does the government put state dollars into research for aquaculture? Well, 3 main factors. And the video talked about this too. Climate change is with us. You know that rising seawater temperature are affecting where lobster stocks are. It's critically harming the available land for producing crops and protein, at the same time that the global population is going to go from 6.7 billion people to 10 billion people by 2050. There is not enough land to feed those people protein. Second thing is consumer demand. So in rich countries, the richer you get, the more you can afford lobster. Okay, kind of figures. In developing countries, the richer you get, the less you rely on carbohydrate staples like maize and corn, and the more you start eating protein. So as the development of the global economy goes up, more and more people want to eat animal protein and fish protein. So the demand for fish protein is through the roof. Look at China. I mean, they're buying everybody's seafood. And then the third thing is, once you do start doing more intensive culturing in the sea, like any intensive agriculture on land, your disease risk profile goes up. And we've all discovered globally about the disease threat of a little virus that was called, what was it, COVID-19. It caused catastrophic disruption to all sorts of things, and it caused people to be locked down. This happens in animal and bird husbandry. When you have a disease, you shut things down. But there's lots of ways that fish farming can prevent all of that if you can vaccinate, if you can have good management practices, if you understand the etiology of the disease profile, if you can breed your stocks to be disease resistant. So those are good reasons why governments want to support this kind of thing. Let me just pause for a second, and I said I would mention money. Our budget a year from government is $2.6 million. So we've been going for 10 years, and they've given us $26 million, and that's absolutely fantastic. And we try to use at least half or more than half of that, if we possibly can, not to do things like this, but to pay scientists to do research. So I'm going to give you some examples of the scientific research we've done. So we did a big project looking at using environmental DNA to find out how bad are salmon farms really. What happens underneath the cage? What happens if you have spare feed? What happens if you have fish waste? How well does the seabed process it and ameliorate it? And how do you know? So Scotland's got some of the tightest environmental regulations in the world for all this kind of thing. It takes farmers 3, 4, 5 years to get planning consent. Does this sound familiar, guys? Yeah, it's hard. You know, it's frustrating. They're constantly complaining about why can't government be smarter. One of the reasons that we did this project is because it helps government be smarter. Because you can find out the environmental impact of the seabed by using eDNA analysis of samples rather than grab samples that you send off to a laboratory somewhere far away and you wait 2 weeks and it's expensive and you have to do multiple sample points. So this technology was done with industry saying we want it, academics saying we can apply the technology, and regulators saying, if you can involve us in the project and let us see how it works, we'll incorporate it into our regulations. So you get quicker answers. So that's a win for everybody. One other example of things that we've been doing on salmon and trout, obviously I met some beautiful Maine lump suckers yesterday. I thought all lump suckers looked like this, and they were like this size. But no, I'm in America. I went to Maine. I saw lump suckers that were this size. It was this big, really, it was. But you know, fantastic that you're doing similar research around cleaner fish. So cleaner fish, fantastic biological way of taking sea lice off fish. You don't need any chemical treatment. You don't need to put your fish through a thermolyser or a hydrolyser that's quite harsh on them. So we've got wrasse on the right, lopfish on the left. We've done multiple projects for at least 10 years on this. Now to the point where we're looking at optimum deployment. So what stocking density of lumpfish do you put in with the salmon pens? How well do they perform at actually eating sea lice? They're kind of shy creatures. They like somewhere they like habitat. So we've created some kelp forests within the sea cages so that they can hide amongst the seaweed. We've looked at their behavior. So are they kind of cocky and proud cleaner fish, which are the sort you want because they're going to go and kind of get those lice, or are they shy and retiring? So some of these projects have been going for many, many years. The very first project that we funded in 2015, so 4 months after we were set up, was a £4 million, so $5 million project. It had the two biggest producers, it had a feed company, and it had two different research universities. And that's a very typical example of the kind of projects that we put together. There are multiple industry players. Why do we do that? Well, we want them to adopt and implement the findings as quickly as possible. So if they're in the tent, they're more aware of what's going on. We also want them to co-fund. So that £4 million project, site put in 800,000, and industry put in 3.2 million. So that's what we're always trying to do. We're trying to get industry money in because industry philosophy would say, and that my board members say this to me when we're doing grant assessments, I wouldn't want to risk the tax dollar, somebody else's money, on a project that my company's not prepared to invest in. If it's so risky I can't see a return, I'm not doing it. So we do not fund anything that is academic push. We only fund things that are industry pull. It means the academics don't always like us, but they've adapted because we've been here now for 10 years and we're about to get refunded, fingers crossed, it's sort of indefinite, but certainly for a guaranteed next 10 years. And if that happens, then hopefully we can continue to be an influential player. So let's talk about shellfish, which I know is probably more than half the people in the room are interested in shellfish. We've got a few different projects, one of which was a catastrophic failure, so I didn't put it on the slide, but I'll tell you about it. So we, and this was one where the finfish guys on our board, and they were guys, and we'll come to that in a minute, they said we wouldn't put our money in this. It was a mussel hatchery. But government really, really wanted it. And the people in Shetland really, really wanted it. So we went on a kind of learning journey visit. So there was a fish farmer, an academic and me, and we got to go to Tasmania, and we talked to the only mussel hatchery in the world that commercially washes its face. And we wanted to understand, how do they do it? How come they're not going bust or constantly subsidized? And then we paid some money to do a tech transfer to bring that technology to Shetland. It failed. And it was a very, very costly and expensive failure. And my explanation for why it failed was, first of all, the researcher that went wasn't a shellfish specialist, but he was from Shetland. And Shetland is a bit like, it's off the north end of Scotland. So if the Scots don't like London, Shetland doesn't like Edinburgh. And it's this kind of thing of, you can only do anything in Shetland if you're from Shetland. And that's true in some senses, but it's very limiting when it comes to applying research. So we had a researcher that wasn't a specialist, and once they got the funding, they kind of refused to involve other researchers from other bits of Scotland or allow even my team to go and meet the Tasmanian folk when they came over. They became quite closed, and I've no idea if this is typical of behaviours in Maine, but sometimes our shellfish sector doesn't want other people to know what they're doing because they're doing something really good and they don't want it to be copied. And that can be a hindrance on, A, getting your innovation to work, and B, getting adoption that benefits everybody. So instead of that story that I wasn't going to talk about, here is the story I'm going to talk about, which is a project that's live right now. We've got some researchers at the Roslin Institute. They were the people that invented Dolly the sheep way back. They did some work to try and diagnose shellfish disease. So really big problem for shellfish farmers is if you've got diseased product and you don't know it's diseased till they're dead, or you might have some disease that means you can't sell your product to market. Everybody's heard of PSP. So in this case, we're talking about Banamia and oyster herpes virus. It would be really, really helpful for shellfish farmers if they had an at-cage test that was cheap, that was quick, and that was reliable. So the researchers that we've paid have done a PCR test, and they gave me a whole lot more pictures, but basically you've got oyster farming on trestle tables bottom right, some oysters top right. What they do is they take a sample of oysters, they stick each one in an individual bucket with some water, they leave it for 24 hours, so you've got this little cartoon here. Then they take a teat pipette of the water out of the bucket, they filter it, they do some DNA analysis, they stick it in this mobile PCR test, and you get a result on your phone. That's not yet commercially adopted. And the academic that's done it is fantastic at doing the science. But when you say to them, why don't you go and present that to the industry? They look scared, and they don't know who the industry are. So then we come along to an annual shellfish conference, and we say, hey, industry, come and talk to this academic. And this academic's lurking in the corner saying, and we say, they won't bite you, honestly. So the industry comes along, and the academic says, I've done this thing, and this is where we're at. And the industry says, we want this, we need this, we have to find a way to get there. But it's not quite that simple, because there's still several steps to get it from lab to scale to product prototype testing and all the rest of it. So right now, we've got a bid in with a UK research grant body to see if we can get this funded. And hopefully we can, and if we can, and if it becomes a commercial product, maybe you guys could buy the product. Sorry, wrong way. And then just last one on kind of projects. The picture on the left here is a sea cucumber. So sea cucumbers are kind of wormy type animals that the Japanese absolutely love eating, and they're very, very high value. And we funded a project with 4 young female researchers who were supported in a women's mentoring program that we ran by a very experienced, mature guy who'd run lots of aquaculture businesses. And they got funding to do some research to say, if you can grow sea cucumbers underneath salmon cages, because they love eating crap, sorry to be crude about it. So off they go, and they go, nom, 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 this is great. You grow your sea cucumbers, and then potentially you've got a route to market. This is a fantastic story in terms of circular economy. One animal is eating the waste of another animal, and you're creating a positive environmental benefit. The 2 pictures on the right are ones, again, I think you probably experience. So these are different forms of harmful algal blooms. So you can have plant, algae, and you can have zooplankton. The one in the middle is just kind of foamy shoreline. The one on the right is a satellite picture of the west coast of Scotland, south of Glasgow, with the island of Arran in the middle. The reason it's that kind of beautiful but also atypical turquoise color is it's full of a bloom. So blooms are bad for shellfish farmers because they kill your animal, and they're bad for salmon farmers as well because they kill your animal too. Or you get a nasty interaction where you get irritation of the gills, and then the animal becomes more susceptible to other kinds of gill disease. So what you can find with disease risk is things layer on top of each other. So if you can solve one problem, you can solve lots of problems. So again, we have been doing some research with, this is much more of an applied project, where we convened 2 workshops with companies across the industry to come together, and we said, how do you do your harmful algal bloom monitoring? You know, literally, tell us what time of day you sample, what kit do you use to sample, what electron microscopes do you use to test, how many people are trained, do they know what they're doing, is there a system? And we found a huge amount of variability. So what we recognized was it would be great if we could develop some standard operating procedures that would help everybody. So they would transfer the knowledge of the best to the knowledge of the less well-resourced, the less able to develop all of that on their own. And what we've now done is we've put a bid in, because anybody like ours, you're always looking for money. So we put a bid into a UK funding source to create an online training program to train 1,500 people that work in salmon on bloom detection. And last year, the Scottish industry lost 20% of their mature salmon before harvest because of bloom. It was horrible. It was millions of dollars. So part of the answer to this is having better techniques and technology, but a much, much bigger part is getting people to understand what different blooms look like under the microscope, How can we do the testing? How can we provide extension support wherever? So again, I think these are things that probably you're facing too. I'll skip past this in a sec, but just again for the shellfish, the bottom left one, we did a molecular project looking at fouling. So fouling of products is an issue. And then the bottom middle one is Clean Treat, is a water treatment technology that's been developed by a British company called Benchmark. It's widely used in Norway already. It's not used in Scotland yet. I don't know if it's going to be used here. But what it does is it allows you to take fish out of the cage, you put them in a wellboat, you treat them with a product, and then you put all of your wastewater through the Clean Treat system. The fish go back in the sea without lice on them. The water goes back in the ocean clean, cleaner than it came out. So that means that you could potentially use salmon Simmons slice here because it never gets in the environment. I'm probably stepping into dangerous territory there about regulations. But if it's biosecure and it's treated, then you've taken all the risk away. I mentioned a little bit the kelp ring forest. So let's have a nice kind of natural kelp forest for the fish. And then everybody's getting on board with the Internet of Things, big data analytics, using robotics and cameras to do all sorts of things. Can it tell you how fast your fish are growing? Can it tell you how many lice are on them? So on and so forth. I'm unbelievably happy to look at this audience because it's probably 40% women. Woo! Let's hear it! No disrespect to anyone who's not female, but in Scotland, 89% of the aquaculture industry is male and 11% is female. So when I heard that stat, which was from a one-off sample survey that the government did in 2017, I thought we probably need to do something about that. Not least just because you might be the only woman working in a farm, you might be the only woman in a boardroom, you might be the only woman with a bright idea who, when you say it, nobody responds, and then when the guy next to you says it, they go, "Oh, that's a great idea." So that, for me, that's not cool. Not trying to be offensive here, honestly, but so I set up this organisation called Women in Scottish Aquaculture. The strapline is "Diversity makes us wiser." Wiser, ER, and wiser, wiser. Great logo. That logo is obviously the flag of Scotland. So what do? We do training, we do mentoring. We have an online forum, we have a safe space, we do interviews with people. The point is to raise awareness in the community about the job opportunities in aquaculture. Because quite often people will only go into jobs where they know someone else that does it. So if you don't know anyone else who's female that works in aquaculture, you're less likely to enter. At the same time, right now, there is a massive skills shortage in the UK economy, partly since Brexit, partly since COVID. Companies can't get the employees they need. If they don't put family-friendly policies in place, they've just reduced the 50% attractiveness to half the population to work with them. So if anybody wants to chat more about that, you can get me over coffee. I won't bang on about it anymore. But in terms of, lockdown was great, actually, for WISA, because we did lots of online stuff, and all the guys could come too, because they were stuck at home working with the wife and kids. And one of the things that happened, which was brilliant, was we had a session on childcare, and one of the reasons that sometimes women can't work in the sector is there's no childcare. So actually you need government policy interventions to boost nursery and kindergarten setup. But the outcome of this was that a young guy had a new baby and said, "It's wonderful, I can spend time with my family because we're working from home. I wish I could have done this when I had my first child, but I couldn't afford to take paternity leave because the corporate policies gave me statutory minimum." The HR director from one of the companies who was on the call went back to their corporate HQ and said, "We could steal a march on our competitors here if we changed our parental leave policies to pay more and pay for a bit longer." So that's what they did. And that obviously cost money on the bottom line, but it doesn't if you can recruit more people and keep them for longer and then they don't get poached by your competitors. So it was a business smart move, and it's a lovely story because it was a case where men and women came together and wanted the same thing. And a company said that's a good outcome for society. Right, I'm getting near the end for anyone that's flagging. What have we learnt about the path to innovation? Well, what we've done is we've spent a fair amount of thought, time, and effort trying to explain the impact. It's really easy to describe activities. We did this, we did that, we had N number of events. But my funders and my board, my industry board, just say, so what? So you did all this lovely activity. So you went to Maine, Heather, so what? So I'm going to have to deliver something when I go home that's of value to the Scottish sector. And again, we can talk about that in a minute. But so we've had some university spin-out companies formed as a result of projects that we funded, one of which has now got venture capital. They are opening an office. They've got an office in Scotland, and they're delivering services to the Scottish industry. They're opening in Norway in April, and Chile and Canada in October. Possibly they're growing too fast, I don't know, but they're going fast because they want to beat the Norwegians who are coming up on their tail to be first to market. So we're seeing Scottish companies are able to export some of their technology around the world. We're seeing more capacity in the industry. So if you can get your disease profile down, or your disease risk down, if you can treat, and you lose less fish through natural losses, what does that mean? It immediately means you're more profitable, you're more productive, and you're more sustainable. Because sustainability is just as much you go to the supermarket, you buy something, you leave it in the fridge too long, you throw it in the trash. It's far more what's the waste in the supply chain. And so if you can improve the efficiency of any farming system, you're doing something good for the planet. So money matters. So I said we got 2.6 million pounds a year. In the 9 years that we've been going, we have funded 72 million pounds worth of research projects. And how much of that was government money? 11.6 million. So the government gave us that money, we put it into projects. So where did the rest of that money come from? So industry put in 41.6 million pounds of these projects. Universities put in 4, and other funding sources, UK funding, EU funding, put in 15 million. So that's a portfolio of projects that's 72 million pounds. But how important is the sector to the economy? Well, we saw the numbers at the beginning, 1.4 billion. It's 54 times, the amount that government spends on us, times 54 is the value to the economy. And the return that we're getting, $5.50 for every dollar that is spent on our research. So wouldn't that be possible also for MAIC? If MAIC had more power to do applied research that gets co-funding from industry, that has a bigger impact, that makes you more productive, more profitable, more efficient, more sustainable, then you have more jobs in rural coastal communities, the banks stay open, the gas stations make more profit, the hotels boom. It's not just a tourism season in the summer, it's a year-round industry. So that's the kind of vision that we're following. We got some economic impact consultants to speak to all of our project partners independently of us, to ask them, what happened after that project finished? Did you employ more people? Did you make more money? Did you save some of your costs? And then they projected what the value to the Scottish economy would be over the next 10 years. And what they're saying is that there will be an extra £150 million, so $220 million, to the Scottish economy because of what we've already done, the money they've already spent. So they don't even need to give us any more and we're getting this. If they give us more, we'll keep doing more of this stuff. What else does that mean in terms of jobs? Can these companies hire more people? Yes, they can. Where are the jobs? They're in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, remote and rural. So this is gold dust for our politicians because the Scottish government wants sustainable rural remote communities. It doesn't want urbanization. So we're helping to deliver that. So what's the end of the path for innovation? Well, I guess the clue in this graphic is it's a circle. And I'm not saying that you keep going round and round the circle in the same way, but I think this is a lovely graphic, and I borrowed it, stole it, copied it from some research that was done on health impacts. But I like the fact that when you look at this, there are different points of intervention. So some of your innovation is you inform people about the business needs. So industry says this is what we need and academics do it. Some of it is invention. Let's produce a new handheld diagnostic kit. Some of it is proving in the lab, does it even work? Do we understand the biology or the technology here? Then you have to prove the value. So you can do it in a lab, but will anybody pay you for it? So that bit's really, really important. Then you get a product or a service, but nobody's using it, or only a few people are using it. So then you need to commercialize, you need to communicate, and then even when they're using it, some people will use it well, some people will use it badly. So how do you push best practice across a sector? So all of this is really about better outcomes from innovation equals more sustainable aquaculture equals good social, economic, and environmental impacts. So my final thoughts are, what do you need to be innovative? And I think our journey has taught us three things. You have to be resourceful and resilient. You have to be willing to face setbacks. So sometimes we put in for grants and we don't get them. Sometimes we fund a trial and it doesn't work. Or the fish don't get delivered on time, or they die for some other reason. So you have to be, third one, consistent. You have to be patient. And this is a really big, important point for government. You can't do innovation in 2 years. You can't really even do innovation in 10 years. But you have to be consistent year on year on year. You fund the projects, you fund the program, you fund the people. Because if we started at the beginning, it's all about people. If the people keep leaving, you can't get that communication going. And you need the right mindset. And the mindset has to be not, it's too scary to try something, or we've always done it this way, or it's too risky. It's, to me, the risk is, what if we don't adapt to change? What if we don't embrace something new and different? So my last sort of thought, and I said to you, my board are going to say to me, so what was that little trip to Maine all about, Heather? I hope that what I've done today is stimulate conversations for you to have over coffee and lunchtime with each other for the rest of the day. A series of conversations about how you want to innovate with funders, with regulators, but also maybe a series of conversations about innovation internationally. How could we cooperate? How could MAIC and SAIT cooperate? How could the shellfish sector and the seaweed sector here help and learn from, and vice versa, the Scottish shellfish and seaweed sector? So could we do some learning journeys or transfer stuff or whatever? Because I'm sure that shared farming experiences between Maine and Scotland will be really, really valuable. So thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to the rest of the day.
Thank you, Heather. That's inspiring. We really appreciate that. Yeah, should we do one? Yeah, sorry. I'm sure there are a lot of questions for Heather, so before you come back up, because we need to do, or shout it out.
Okay, Heather, my question is, so one of the big things that I saw missing from the presentation, and it's one of our challenges in the state of Maine, is that there's a disconnect between industry and government. And it's really difficult to raise the money and to have that long-term commitment to innovation if you don't have a plan. And if you haven't done the geospatial planning and you know where all of this new aquaculture is going to go. Have you done that work? Do you know where you want to be in 50 years? Have you mapped it out? And do you have some general idea of that?
My organization supported a project the industry did in 2016 to write a growth plan from then to 2030 that looked to double growth. It identified some of the challenges and hurdles that were going to stop that growth happening, and it challenged government and academia and everybody else, including industry itself, to change some of what they were doing. So that was a plan that's now 5 or 6 years out of date. The Scottish government are on the brink of writing a national vision for aquaculture, which I've encouraged them to make it go as far as 2045 or further, because I think if you have visions that last 5 years, they're not really visions, they're delivery plans. It's currently encumbered with the politics of lobby groups, because lobby groups are absolutely brilliant at lobbying politicians, and politicians try and listen to everybody, and that sometimes doesn't give you a clear vision, it gives you a kind of fuzzy compromise. But we're on the brink of hopefully government saying positive things. I think if they do, it will lead to more foreign direct investment. I mean, the Norwegian government has just massively increased the tax rate on salmon production there. So all that capital is pulling out of Norway and it's got to go somewhere else. So you could say, do you want it to come to Maine? We want it to come to Scotland because our global market share of salmon has been falling for the past 20 years, while everybody, well, Chile and Norway and Iceland and Faroes are booming. So it's all about jobs and economy at the end of the day. But yes, we've got a vision. It's a bit old. We've got a new vision that's a government vision, which won't necessarily reflect everything industry wants, but I think it will say some of the right things. Sorry.
So you mentioned something that is really important, which is the 10-year time span on a project to result in the outcome. The way our research is set up, it's usually like 1 to 3 year grant that might be one specific aspect of this outcome, which might involve 20 steps or whatever. How do you staff that, or how do you keep continuity over that time period?
So we've been funded in 2 5-year blocks. The first 5 years, we had a research pot of £7 million. And most of the projects we funded were 3 to 4 years long. So we gave a commitment to the universities they could hire PhDs and postdocs to do that work, and they knew they had that guaranteed work. Our second 5 years, our project pot went from 7 million to 3 million because money was tight. In our new funding, we might not get a project pot. So if we don't get a project pot, we can't give that guarantee. So it is down to finding ways to help politicians realize that patient capital and long-term investment is probably the only way to affect major policy change in the landscape of your state or your country.
So do you staff it yourself?
No, we don't. No, we outsource all the research. We are not researchers. We are enablers. So we fund. We do the contracting with the industry and the academic partners, because you always have to agree about what happens when IP comes out and who owns it and how do you commercialize it. We do actively project manage. And I think that's one thing that we've learned from when we started to where we are now, is we think our project management expertise is so good, people should pay us to do it instead of us doing it for free. So that if we can get industry to pay us to project manage things for them, it means we don't need to use grant money to do that. And if industry get enough return, which we've shown them that they're getting, then hopefully they would reinvest. That's not true of shellfish, because nobody has the staff numbers and the spare capital generally to put extra into projects, but it is true of finfish. Hi.
Howdy. Can you speak to any specific efforts, I don't know if your group's involved in this or not, but to, on the business side, to do branding for Scotland as a whole for, let's say, shellfish? Has your group been involved in doing that at all?
SAIC hasn't, and we focus really tightly on what we do. And so we do applied research on fish health and welfare and the infrastructure around farming pre-slaughter. So we don't do anything on processing or markets at all. There are other organisations that do this. So there's a body called Seafood Scotland that works to promote seafood consumption by capture fisheries and farm fisheries domestically and around the world. What we find on the finfish side is the companies don't want it because they want to maintain their own brands. On the shellfish side, mostly because the farmers are all part of this, the Scottish Shellfish Marketing Group, which is the name of the processing body. That body represents the interests of the farmers in the quality in the province. But largely what they're doing there is they're doing own label for supermarkets. So it's not their own brand, it's an M&S mussels in garlic and wine, or Marks and Spencer's, or our big supermarket brands. And in some ways, the supermarket brand recognition is stronger and more important. So although I hear a lot of times companies or individuals or lots of people say, well, let's have a brand for this place or this product. I think the commercial food world is so competitive, it's kind of hard to have a brand distinction. So you could probably trade on things like, provenance, quality, place of origin. You can do some marketing around putting the farmer's face. I mean, I think now some of our supermarkets, they have like a QR code on the pack, and when you hover your phone over it, up pops your face standing with your farm, and this product came from this guy. So that's not universally true, but some supermarkets are doing that to kind of help that personal connection of where your food's coming from.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
The first question from a woman. Right, let me just tell you this. This is a serious point. Some academic research was done about what the effect is of a woman asking the first question in any group compared to a man asking the first question in any group. And if a woman asks the question in any scenario at all, the probability of other women asking questions goes up to like 87%. And if the man does, the probability of women asking questions goes to 13%. So it's my fault for not saying, I want the first question in this room from a woman. So sorry, guys, I got that one totally wrong. Sorry.
Oh, I think I'm over here. There's not only a woman, but also a pregnant woman.
Woo!
So the question I have is, here in Maine, we have a line of Norwegian companies out the door trying to get into our beautiful, cold, clean waters. And I wonder if there's a mandate that you're operating under to support homegrown, Scottish ownership and the kind of economic diversity that makes for more resilience over the long run and has small, medium, and large size operations. And I say this from Washington County, where jobs might be gold dust, but entrepreneurship would be something great for our county.
Yeah. On salmon, Scotland used to have 15 or 20 salmon companies. As of 2 years ago, the last Scottish-owned salmon company chose to sell to a Norwegian multinational. We now have four producers, and only four, sorry, five, I beg your pardon, but four big ones. And the fifth one has got California venture capital in it. Of those four, two are Norwegian, one is Faroese, and one is Canadian. I think the economics and the risk of growing salmon, where it takes you 3 years and you've got harmful algal blooms that kill your entire stock, and you have to keep investing in technology, and your overheads and the cost of your feed inputs are really, really high, and they're going up because of fuel costs and because of everything else. I think it would be a dream to think that you can start indigenous salmon farming and they would survive. Because I just personally don't think that the global economy lets it work like that. Our strategy in Scotland is to support the growth and scale up of Scottish small and medium-sized companies, typically in tech or equipment or diagnostics. So one of the spin-outs that I mentioned, it's a company called Wellfish Diagnostics. They did their first project in 2016 with grant money we gave them. The academic who did the work was not a fish biologist. He knew nothing at all about fish or aquaculture. He was a biochemistry person. And he did blood biomarkers for disease. And some bulb in his head went, why don't we do blood chemistry for fish? And you go to the GP or the doctor and you're feeling a bit poorly, and they do a blood test on you, and all the parameters of your potassium and your this and your that, and then you can see, is it low, is it high? Nobody knows what those ranges are for fish, and nobody knows what those things mean. But this guy did a project, and then he did another project, and he got some more money, and he's now commercialized where he has a blood sample testing company that can tell the farmer what's wrong with the fish. Until he came along and did that, if you want to know what's wrong with your fish, you kill it. So it's definitely dead at that point. And then you send it to a lab 700 miles away, and you wait 2 weeks, and then they tell you what's wrong with it. Meanwhile, all the other fish that came out of that pen are getting sicker and sicker because you're waiting 2 weeks to get your answer. So that company is, we would call a massive success, and it's a Scottish business. And if they can go global and make money, and they will be employing people in the geographies that they're delivering their services by definition, but that for us would be a great outcome. And the same around other kind of supply chain technologies, other kinds of tech around subsea cameras, data analytics, all that kind of thing. Seaweed definitely could be. So that's an area where we need to think about routes to market. I think you're ahead of us. I think there's also a lot of stuff around seaweed bioprocessing and how that becomes a high-value product into other industrial requirements. We have got one project that's used seaweed as a feed ingredient for cows, and it reduces methane emissions. So you can have a climate-positive effect by feeding a particular seaweed ingredient. And again, that's a Scottish company. I don't think they're commercialized yet. They're still in trials, but that's probably where we're going. And I'm sorry, it might not be the answer you want to hear, but we struggle a bit. And again, for a while, our government it's all about Scottish micro businesses. But how many entrepreneurs where the micro business is 1 or 2 people have got the time? They're just running their business. And it's really hard to, so they do need support into that. But I think if you can get scale up for companies that go from 10 to 50 employees and then make them export, or that's a better route. I'm sorry, I don't know the geography, the demographics of your state, so I hope I'm not treading on toes here.
So in solidarity with my gender, I'm going to allow one more question so that we've got...
Scarlett just reminded me to say that I'm also lactating and breastfeeding mama over here, so just sharing it all. I'm an educator, so my question is about what the aquaculture education ecosystem is in Scotland. Like, are kids learning about aquaculture in school? What's their pathway or opportunities for exploration of your industry?
Yeah, so we don't have anything like GMRI, which I thought was an absolutely awesome program when I saw it 2 days ago. We've done so we fund MSc and PhDs, and we've done work with organizations that help post-16, post-school, so tech college type training. We're looking to provide training to teachers and lecturers and educators as one way of trying to distill down. We've also discovered that young people are very interested in kind of climate action type roles. So if you can rebrand aquaculture as not being called aquaculture, but it's called, I don't know, the green economy of the future, or kind of nature first companies. It's still a company, but it's using nature for good to feed us all. That seems to appeal a little bit more. But we've got a long way to go, and it's a big challenge. And lots of people in coastal communities, they consider aquaculture to be what you do if you can't do anything else, which is a terrible vibe. And also lots of people leave to go to university and college and they don't come back. So there's an issue around how do we retain people in communities. One of the things we've been good at doing is getting the big Norwegian salmon companies are building houses. And they build 10 houses, 2 are for their employees, 5 are for sale, and 3 are for what we would call social housing. So you have one for your nurse because your hospital can't recruit a nurse because there's no affordable housing for her to live in, or a policeman or whatever. So you create social capability, but the industry's paying for that because they need social license. They need the people that live there to say, we're glad this Norwegian company's here. So I think you can be kind of clever about that sort of thing. Thank you. You can get me over coffee.
So to keep us a little bit on schedule, one is we'll speak for a little less, which is probably a good thing.
That's a very good thing.
And 2, Gail's going to speak after the coffee break, because we've got plenty of time in that next session.
Let's see. Okay. So